Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to cover the iPhone 7 Plus repair. It's very similar to the iPhone 7 with a few differences. So I'm going to speed it up and let's jump in. Take off the two pentalobes at the bottom. These are normal pentalobe screw that all the iPhones use. Now the adhesive is a lot stronger on this one versus a 6S. A 6S has some of that adhesive around the edge. Now it's not dubbed water resistant on the 6S, but this phone is. And what they do is just put a layer of adhesive all around the edge. So what I'm doing here is using a heat gun all around the edge. Some people use like hot plates, but I prefer to use spot treatment with a heat gun. That way I'm not heating up the battery and other unnecessary internals. But with a heat gun, you have much higher heat, so you do have potential to ruin things. So use caution. So I used an iSesamo or a Jimmy to open this up, and then I'm using a guitar pick to slide the adhesive all the way around the edge. Now at the top, there's prongs in conjunction with the adhesive. So it's a little bit stronger at the top. So I'm just using my guitar pick to slide all the way around. I'm sliding it down, and then it opens to the right. So unlike other phones, this opens to the right like a book rather than towards the top. So the very first thing you always want to do is remove the battery. So I'm taking this plate that covers the digitizer connectors and the battery. There's 4 screws and they're all tri-screws, tri-point screws. And that's what the main tool is that you'll use on the inside of an iPhone 7 and 7 Plus. That's different than any other iPhone. It's a combination of Phillips, tri-point, and then pentalobe for the bottom. But yeah, so I'm removing these 4 screws. I'm going to zoom in on a couple of these things as well. So all I'm doing is disconnecting the battery first. It's really important you do this. It's always been important, but especially with iOS 11, there's been some weird things going on if you disconnect the battery at different times. So after I've removed those 2 plugs up top, I'm taking off the proximity sensor. Now this is probably the most common broken part among repair techs. This ribbon's very fragile. They do give you a lot more slack this time around on the 7 and 7 Plus, but just disconnect it and now you have your entire display off. There's 3 parts of this that I like to think about, you know, the plate, the proximity, and then down below by the home button. There's 4 screws over the home button, and they're the tri-point screws. So remove those. I'm just going to take off the shields first, and then I'm going to use heat a little bit later to remove those parts. But for right now, you can just simply remove the plates and take them off. So that's what I'm going to do here. For whatever reason, there's 4 or 3 tri-point screws and then a Phillips. Up top, it's all Phillips. And I believe there are 6 screws there, just taking off the shield for right now. Some parts you buy, you can have some of these parts pre-installed. They are a little bit more expensive, but you'll still always have to transfer your home button. So there's the speaker. Took off the plate, took off the speaker. Just showing you down below. I'm pushing a little pry tool there just to disconnect. Now this home button comes out of the front. So I'm heating up the display from the front to loosen the adhesive on this Touch ID. Now this is a big disclaimer. You can, if you break this is really easy to break. If you tear it, you will never get it to work again unless you have Apple replace it. Same thing for the procs up top, heating it up from the outside. This one's a little bit trickier. This is trickier than I think any other procs I've worked on, at least for iPhones. Heating it up. Now, I'm going to remove the actual auto brightness and the proc sensor from the top. And then I'm going to slowly slide my pick underneath all of those to get it off. And it comes off just like that. That black tape needs to cover those gold pins. Usually it comes with it. This time it didn't. So I'm removing it, and then you have to cover those gold pins. What can happen is that can short out, which will break the proximity flex if you go to plug this in and there's not that tape over it. So very important you transfer that tape. On the iPhone 7, however, it just comes with it every single time. But on the 7 Plus, I've noticed it does come off sometimes. So just make sure you transfer that and that there's no gold pin showing. So right now I'm going to take the plate off. I believe there's 5 screws, and they're all the tri-point screw. And with the tri-point, it's very easy to strip these screws. It's a lot like the pentalobe, where it's kind of finicky, and you want to make sure you use good tools with it. I've worked with maybe 3 or 4 different tri-points, and for whatever reason, this cheap knockoff tool I got on eBay or Amazon works better than some of the professional tools that I've used, so I've stuck with it. So taking these off, you're going to feel a little bit of pressure taking this plate off. Now it's not glued or stuck anywhere, but there is some adhesive attached to that ribbon down below, and that's fine if you tear it, because on your new part, that's there's a new ribbon there, so you don't have to worry about tearing this part, but you do want to take the tape that comes with it. It's gonna circle, I think that's the controller box for the LCD. So let's get our new part, and now we just do it in reverse order. So we've taken off every part that we need to transfer onto our new one. Depending on the quality of the screens, they're gonna have different adhesive, different places. You just wanna make sure when you're tearing it up, you don't tear one of those ribbons, because usually there's tape attached to it. But make sure you remove all those. Let's just do it in reverse order. Now what I just did there's a prox bracket. Usually it's dead center. This one was on crooked, so if I were to put in the proximity sensor, it may not work because it was cockeyed. So I just reposition that there, and then I'm gonna move it into place when I'm positioning it. For right now, I just put the plate back on. Make sure you feed those ribbon cables exactly how you removed it. And now I'm just gonna secure that in place, put in those 5 tri-point screws. And with this, there's not really an order, but if you put on the home button and the plate first, one of these bolts on this plate goes through that one. So if you're gonna pick one to do first, either do the proximity at the top or the shield, and then do the home button last, because the home plate has to go onto this back shield. All right, so I'm feeding through that home button. It's got to go up through the front. Now, you have to make sure this is right on. This takes me a couple of tries. Sometimes you have to reposition where you laid that cable to get it right where it needs to clip into. And you never want to set the plug down and move it around if you're missing. You want to lift it back up, go where you think it is, try and connect it. If it's not, lift it back up, try and reseat it. But you never want to scratch the pins and try and find it that way, because then you can damage it, especially this Touch ID, where there's no going back if you end up ruining it. So once that's on, I'm going to screw on that plate bracket. And that should be all secure. And just a reminder, there's 3 tri-point screws, and then there is 1 Phillips on the very end. Okay, so working on the proximity, this is probably the most difficult part. It's not hard, but everything has to go in the right place, or your speaker may not work, your prox may not work, and this can actually affect your Touch ID as well, in the sense that if the prox isn't working, it may make your the vibrator motor on your Touch ID not work. So when you go to hit the button, it may act like a button, but you're not going to feel it, and it won't give you that vibration sense that you're hitting a button. So I'm just laying it down where everything goes. Put the speaker, you want to make sure those 4 gold prongs are touching those contact points. Put your bracket back on, and then just put in the screws, and these are all Phillips. Now, I'm about to put the screen on. This is where some people can damage the display. Taking it off, taking it on, taking it out, putting it back in. Those ribbons are very finicky. If there's even a tiny tear, even if it's really hard to see with the eye, the proximity isn't gonna work. So just make sure when you're reinstalling it that you don't drop this display. I usually like to prop something up against it so it doesn't fall. But what I'm doing is connecting all the connectors first and then doing the battery. And I know some people like to fully install everything and then test it, but I just have everything connected. I'm gonna turn it on, make sure it's all good. Looks like it is, so I'm gonna prop something up against it so that display doesn't wanna fall, because that's not a very fun day. Once you've gone through this whole process, let that display fall, rip your cables. You may not even be able to repair what just broke if that happens. So always be very careful. Proximity sensor, home button, Those are you can replace the proximity, and that's fine, but that Touch ID is not replaceable. And I'm just putting all the screws back in, put the plate back on. Now I'm going to clip it in. So to clip it in, there are clips at the very top. You're going to set those in first and then slowly clip in the sides. But our new digitizer cable is not bent like it normally is, so you have to make sure to shove that back into the display before you fully close the enclosure. And I'll show you that here in one moment. Okay, so I'm going to seat the top of the display first. And I'm going to zoom in on this cable. That's the cable that we just replaced. I'm just shoving it in with a spudger to make sure it doesn't get pinched. And that's it. Just make sure you put in those pentalobes. That can often get missed. Last 2 pentalobes, then this repair is complete, and then you can move on to test all the sensors in the device to ensure that it works.